everybody after the short break. We've got the last activity planned today. The final one, but very interesting and dynamic one, so I'm glad you have stayed here until the end. So, welcome to the discussion panel. Our topic for the panel is what, how and why. The role of research in digital products design. It's going to be a discussion about new challenges that stand in front of people doing digital projects and help us facilitate the product design process. Krzysztof Miotk, co-owner of Quay UX Agency, the UX po godzinach podcast, head of postgraduate program in US research at CDV. Then we've got Joanna Gerasimiuk, US researcher and designer at Data Feedwatch. Another speaker is Alex Dziewulska, head of product design at Uptension, lecturer of UX design as postgraduate program as SWPS, working for Intiv as well. And the moderator of today's discussion is Kajtek Budkowski, product designer and researcher, HCM DEC. Good luck. Thank you for wishing us good luck, and we take it. Hello everybody. Whoever was here in the room and has been here the whole day know my voice, but I will keep talking anyway. There is an initiative to wonder why we do research, for whom we do research, why is it important. I'd like to leave the framework of thinking about scripts, scenarios, concepts, how to do research on the one hand, but also wonder on what's behind that all. So you know the questions, because I sent them to you. But the panelists know the questions. I would like to wonder about it a little bit. We've got 45 minutes to do that. I'd like to go through several questions in our little group, and then there is a quarter for you to ask any questions and have some insights into our discussions about whatever you find interesting related to research. So this particular research sample is not accidental. Ola represents Software House, so our consultant. Asia works with the product, and Krzysztof works in the agency. So I would like to have 3 different perspectives and merge them here in the room and check what the differences are, compare and contrast. Let's go. My first question, and I would like you to ask it from your own perspective.
Kurde, jeszcze pod nosem mówię, jaki mam kod, cholera. Ja bym chciał się zastanowić o tym, nad tym i żebyście mi trochę powiedziały.
For whom do you think the research results are? Not from the perspective that is for designer, for product manager and so on, but to whom it's best to give the research results in order to democratize research and make them go everywhere. So from your perspective, whom should you give the research results so that they reach the proper heads and start working? Asia, why don't you start? Asia's delighted to go first. Thank you so much. You're always there to rely on. From my product perspective, as the only UX researcher in my organization, it's a hard task to realize who is the best to be given the results to. I like working close with designers, so let me repeat that. So Rita and working in the designers team, where we can research and design at the same time, return to the research and redesign, it is an artifact. And skipping the stage where you actually give the report and it just goes in the drawer, nobody cares. I like working close with designers, and surely that's something I would like to go deeper into that. In the previous presentation, Wojtek talked about flattening the hierarchy. I know how much I still have to do myself to flatten this pyramid we have at work and include everybody. In my organizations, it was really difficult to make people observe research, to encourage them to come to see how actually the responder has a problem with the product. That's why I try to show them recordings, videos, sort of voice pieces, in order to hear the voice, maybe modified, how a person is talking about the product, and make it as an insight and an element that would sparkle the empathy process. And in fact, I do appreciate and I want to work with business. Therefore, I'm going in this direction, doing my studies connected with business, because I can feel that if I learn the business perspective, it will be easier for me to convince the stakeholders that the research results are important and they should be implemented in the organization. I would like to encourage researchers to be close to business, to understand the business perspective, and include and participate and feel what we can use to convince somebody. Krzysztof? To whom do I give the research results? Well, I think we should start with asking another question. So what's the purpose? It's not always the official goal of the project, but the UX aim, the researcher's aim, because it could so happen that we want to introduce the research culture to our company. And we need to consider that on what level of awareness is this company, who is hired there, what's their experience, people who should work with product, and then next make a decision for whom I'm doing the research. At one point, it will be some kind of conscious, aware client, and we are conducting research for some product manager or a designer, and we know the structure of the company. We know there are project teams, they are separate, we provide them with the research results and they are acting on it. Everything happens within the company, they know what the research is for and how they work. They know how to use that. So that's where we direct our research results. It's different when the company doesn't have the research culture. And then there could be this kind of side product and side evangelistic goal. At that point, we have to direct our results to the designer, what should be designed, but we also should know that the management is going to get the results. Well, it's not always a board of management. Sometimes it's 5 people startup and 2 people are management. Such situations will happen. So we have to ask ourselves the question, why are we doing this? And at what stage a given company is, so that we can move on. And it happened to me, even though it's rare, that I was doing 2 presentations. One for product designers and the programmer. It was a very small company for them to show them direction. And the other presentation, which indicated the monetary value, it was for the management board. For them to know why it was done, why was the research done. We have 2 presentations because if you want to have one, what's for everything, it's for nothing. That's the way to go as well. Depends on where we're working, actually. Ola, what's your perspective? I'm smiling, listening to my other panelists, because there are two perspectives here you need to combine. We have to look after the sponsor, and it's cynical maybe, but it's true, for the client to understand what value there is in research. So we need to show them such results that will give them the business value, not only service or product value, the one for product team. But the sponsor himself, herself need to understand that the money put into research just give them return on investment. And another perspective closer to what Asia has said, some research for product team or service building team. And let me ask, what are actually research results? Is it report? Is it little nuggets, sort of atomic research everybody can read and everybody can understand? Because they have been edited by the researcher and the biases have been removed. They are things everybody can read, like a little pill of research knowledge. But there are also results when we talk about workshops that we conduct, and the mapping we do during the workshops sums up everything we have come up with, all kind of ideation sessions and so on, whatever method you're using. What I really underline when I need to present the research results, what my goal is, what do I want to achieve through the research. Sometimes there is some hidden purpose for popularization of research. They are not the younger sister of design. I hate this, actually. It's an equal discipline of design as much as development is. What the researcher, designer, and developers do, product owners, product managers, all people involved in product, we are solving questions and solving problems. Research results is everything that helps me make a decision and solve a problem. Let me just jump in there. Krzysztof and Ola, you have mentioned evangelization and how important it is to popularize. Asia talks about particular roles she cooperates with, but what about we are not only evangelizing within the product or within the board of directors, it's the whole organization. What people do we need to find in the organization as first partners to show them the research results, to work on the research results with them, how to find them, whom to find? That's a good question. Quite often, I work with people who need research knowledge and not often get it. People who don't know we are doing research, but they need it. But in software house, they go to client and sell our services. If they have access to the research, they are beneficiaries, like naturally, because then they can answer the client's questions and the sales process is easier. Another natural ally will be marketing. They also conduct research, different type of research. We can discuss here and debate whether UX and marketing research is the same level. Let's not do that. Maybe there are some marketing experts here. To me, it's a natural ally because marketing understands that research is needed. It's not a department I need to explain who I am and why I even take money and earn money in this company. Customer service, another department that sources feedback from client and therefore needs the research results. As we create research insights, we can optimize their work. So responding to your question, there are certain departments, there are natural allies, and there are certain departments that treat research results as tools, but not the way to solve problems. And here, product management often is the first on the list. The approach is let's do research because we have to do that, but we don't have to draw any conclusions and now enter them into the process or include them into the process. Nobody's going to wait for that. It's time consuming. The same question from from Krzysztof's perspective. I'm wondering about particular people. What kind of people are we looking for? So that to increase our chances to have our research and results noticed in the organization. The simplest answer, regardless of whether we are an agency or just an employee, the person who employs you, they give you money. So naturally, they become your ambassador. And here, from startup perspective, I had two managers. One of them believed in research, and the other, I'm pretty sure, asked himself question why he even pays me every day. Until we got to the point where he started seeing the value in research as well. And then the first manager who previously convinced the other one to hire me, I was the first employee of the startup, he was my ambassador. He was my support. In the case of agency, it's pretty similar. Various people order the research. They are usually PMs, and then I'm sometimes laughing that the role of agency is making PMs to get a pat on the shoulder for making a right decision. This is our role, do our job well. And naturally we know that if somebody invests thousands in us, in research, this means they are allies. That's the first line, I would say. Then the qualities, of course. Whoever nods to your ideas, although we cannot really trust that, it doesn't mean they agree with you. Sometimes they simply nod because there is, a film on YouTube they are watching at the same time. So you can have individual conversations. So there are next stages. In my case, even programmers were allies. When I showed them, look, if I can detect something sooner, you will not have to code it senselessly. And they realized, well, I never had this perspective, but it kind of makes sense because I've got enough to do without that, so it makes my life easier and work easier. It's ingenious. That's how it works in my organization. Okay, another subject. I would like to ask, those research processes are often sold and sometimes we start. So what about the research red flags? What are the situations you need to do more research than the team, the client, or whoever stakeholder by this decision-making table than that it seems to them? It's the most difficult questions you asked us. It's a difficult problem in general. Red flags come up at the first call. You've got the client call or some in-house project call, product team, service team, doesn't matter. There's the first meeting, there comes researcher, and we know. Hello. And with hello, we know we need more time for research than you have planned. Why? Because we, as people, have very many biases in our heads. The higher you work in product, the more they think they know more. And they are not questioning their own knowledge. So we are coming there as know-alls. Some of us have really sneak ideas how to avoid that. We've got workshops, we've got assumption mapping. We try to understand what assumptions there are in the organization, what questions there are asked, and what data there is. Sometimes the data is there, and we know there is there, but nobody knows where you can find that. So you can dig up some data from several research resources, and only then we can say we've got data whatsoever. The red flags In my 20 years of practice, I have never had a process where I would come in and somebody says, we need this, that, and that, let's say 3 months of work. I would say, okay, 3 months, perfect. It's always been like you have to dig some things up and challenge some assumptions. I'm not sure whether you use the known, I know, important, unimportant matrix. So we try to make the sponsor, the product team, which information is actually known. And if so, I would like to have the data on the table. If not, I know it's something you have to study and whether the impact on the project is high or not. With every project, we need to detail that. So we need to know whether the research we are trying to do and we want to do is crucial. A red flag is always when there is no space for challenging in the company. It's a great red flag, and sometimes I just drop the job and not work with the client where there is no way to challenge the dogma. We know it all. So how do you see that? That you know the client is difficult to work with. I've got a kind of bullshit detector at that point. I ask questions for whom the product is, what are target groups, what's problem we are solving, and start listening to the answers. And you probably agree that you can sound whether the response is we are wondering, thinking, or is it categorically it's our client, they are their needs, we know it all. And when I ask, okay, it's interesting, but in this particular business, I have a particular experience, ABC, and the client goes off. And I can see we are not going to discuss the ABC, but here is what they want, and that's it. And I'm scared of such projects, I'm scared of the risk they pose for me as a researcher and the whole company I represent, and the project we are going to conduct, and the client himself or herself, because it's the highest risk on their side. We are coming there, doing our job, but they are going to waste your money. What are the red flags for you? To a large extent, I do agree with Alex. The beginning, I would just call yellow flags, actually. Because if they were red flags, most of my project would never work. We must prioritize certain things in the organization. We are not moderators for the user and a facilitator for the organization. Sometimes you need to take the wheel over because you cannot really manage somebody's company, but just to indicate how to do that and explain that under given time limit and budget you can achieve those 3 out of 7 goals, for example. And after 3 goals, we can take a break. Let's give ourselves several months so we can make some money as you have achieved them. And then you can execute another few. So at the beginning, you can see whether we can work with that. If you can estimate your project at the start, you know whether it's possible to do or not. My red flag, that would be like the project I did, where I was working as a regular researcher. It was our regular client. And the company had the approach that they sold to the client a 90-minute session, research session with the users. And the client wanted to maximize on this particular 90 minutes. So it cannot be an hour and a quarter. So if it was an hour and a quarter, he dropped in another process, like another 30 minutes, 45 maybe, and the researcher had to deal with that. Then we are in trouble, because there were 2 completely different processes. One time you've got the money, and the other time you don't have any money, you have to borrow some. So the user needs to think about it, the researcher needs to think about it. You've got 2 processes, 1 hour processes, and you've got 90 minutes because that's what they pay for. If it happens once, it's acceptable. If it's systematic, as a leader, you have to decide whether the client or your employee, that's my opinion, but it's a red flag that's really there and you need to see it. It's not the general process, red flags, but within the elements of the process, you get red flags that show you that maybe you should cut some relationship at some point and just say thank you. And what's your perspective? You're thinking, I'm in the process, in the product, there are some requirements, demands, aims, and you need to wonder how to achieve them. So, how do you start thinking about somebody's going overboard? Let me refer to what Alex has said. It's the first call, and you already can sense the meat. Sometimes the ticket in GIR is the first warning, like, do the survey. Most of the time, I just enter the call and try to find the reason behind that. What's the goal? Because quite often, the particulars are much faster than the aims we want to achieve. So it's the red flag. Maybe we can find some other methods, more matching the product. So it's a mini red flag that it's easier to say and talk about the particular element I should do. And also, there's another aspect. Quite often I ask about threats to the project. What could go wrong? What should I pay attention to? What is undoable? If I ask about threats and I get no answer, I usually know there is something there, I'm just not told. And we haven't thought about it. And that's the element where there is this mini red flag popping up. I ask more questions in the organization, whether there are no risks there. And the biggest red flag for me is the situation where we are, let's say, creating a feature. We want to add some functionality and there is no failure rate criterion. Nothing that helps us or allows us to reject the project entirely if it doesn't fulfill assumptions. That's my biggest problem. I can see there is no failure criterion. There's no situation where we simply step back from the project and we just say it failed.
You've mentioned that very often you get this yellow or red flag and you start asking questions, looking for priorities, thinking about what's really going on. So, Asia, what tools do you use or what tools do you find useful to get to the bottom of things? If you say that, a 15-minute call is enough, okay, that's fine, but what do you do in cases where you need to research too many things? What tools work for you as far as prioritization? I think a call would be one thing, and I use it a lot. And I'm very often this person who asks the same question again, but reformulate it. And sometimes after I repeat the question about the goal, this goal is revealed. I think these are pretty standard techniques, like impact effort matrix is a great tool. I also have standard questions I like to ask before the kickoff, and I ask about threads and particular elements. I optimize them, but I have this checklist for kickoffs to find out what I need to research, and I optimize it based on the project. So you've mentioned, or we've talked about this, that research on one hand becomes democratized, but on the other hand, I had this interesting conversation recently, and one researcher said democratization of research is not always good because this average of competence goes down and organizations don't really know how to control that. We had this presentation about siluses, so we have this inconsistent vision of research reality, and I see two lines. One is democratization of research. We all have competences and we all can do this. That's one side of the coin. And the other one is let's hire more researchers, let's build competences and specialists in the organizations. So these are two ways that I see looking at the market. So I'm interested in your perspective. What direction is the market taking? And also, do you feel it's the right direction and why? So let's start with Krzysztof. Okay, you actually stated two questions. The first about the direction, I'm not sure. I don't have data and I don't know what the trend is. However, I have certain experiences that suggest that in some companies democratization is a good idea and in some other quite the opposite. So that's why I don't see a trend because I'm not sure about the scale of this phenomenon. And Alex mentioned atomic research, and I think it also doesn't work in all organizations. It's a kind of buzzword currently stemming from atomic design. So if it's fashionable, let's do it. But actually, there's no one to take charge, and everybody adds something to it. So it's a big swamp we are drowning in, and we just splash in it and saying, yeah, atomic research. So that's when you need to make a hard decision and say, okay, it doesn't work. Sometimes it's difficult to admit because you've invested a lot, and some companies can splash in this swamp for years. But there are also companies, among them many startups. For example, I tried to convince this second boss about research, and I made a scenario, and I decided that I would run 75% of sessions and the remaining 25% other people. And then we saw what mistakes were made, but at least they had some contact and some experience. And then the other boss, the second boss who didn't believe in research, said, okay, I can run this workshop. Just can you prepare the Miro board and just support me so it all goes well? And this kind of democratization works because eventually developers also started believing in this and asked about research. But it's okay when you start from scratch, but not if the company's been there for years. So democratization doesn't always work. And another important aspect are deadlines. My cost was huge, not because my salary was so high, but because the product team were waiting for research results. And I can't clone myself. I can't run 2 or 3 sessions at the same time. We didn't have a budget for freelancers or other researchers, and we had a small team. So I engaged my supervisors. And so we managed to speed things up, and we saved some money so that the designers and developers didn't have to wait. And we know how much money they make and how much their time costs. So I think that in this kind of situation, democratization is good. What do you think? Democratization or specialization? I don't like the term research democratization. I like the term democratization of access to knowledge. I think everyone should be exposed to user, to deal with feedback and with users, and they must know who the user is. What I have a problem with is access with unprocessed data, because that's why we train researchers so that they know how to ask non-leading questions and how to eliminate bias. It's very easy to spoil research. You can spend a lot of money and run research without any understanding of what you're doing. And this is how you make wrong decisions, because they are based on unreliable research results. So I like all the processes that aim at opening access to everyone in the organization and putting a user in the center. But I think that research as such should be conducted by researchers. And it should be processed with product teams or with a client. But what you mentioned, Krzysztof, about little nuggets of knowledge, there are organizations where it works great. For example, Empathy in PKO Bank. And I wish Szymon Staniszkis was here with us today. They did an amazing thing. Each person in the organization has access to data and they can learn from this. But in startups, you don't really have time for this. So there's no point in doing that. But it all boils down to this democratization of knowledge, yes, and access for everybody, yes, but I think this knowledge should be generated by true researchers who put a lot of research into becoming a researcher, gaining experience, being bias resistant. We are all humans. It's not like that a researcher is 100% resistant to bias after 5 years of studies. No. But the difference between a researcher and someone else is that they can actually notice certain things, like too much enthusiasm, for example. So let me be the devil's advocate. When we think about triangulation and objectivization of research results, one form would be looking at raw data by many people. That's what I said, that you need a researcher who works with the product team, because research result interpretation, the more diverse the group of people who analyze the data is, the better interpretation. And I don't like when there's no researcher in the team, and that's when I have a problem with this. You need a researcher to notice that, for example, the last user wasn't really right. They were just the last one, or somebody was the loudest person and they didn't really say anything wise. They were just loud and easily noticeable. Your perspective, Asia? It's very difficult in a product. So generally, research and this question about product is difficult because in startups, researchers very often take on the role, like me. We are a mix of researcher and designer. We deal with both things, one leg here, one leg there. So it's really hard to have this research culture, sustain research, and do it alone and being specialized in this. So I'm not really sure if specialization in product is even possible. I think I opt for democratization here. But I would love to work on products where I can use my knowledge, where I can specialize and show results of my research, invite people to observe the process, because I think insights are the best when they are shared in the organization and they are not a researcher's perspective. So if a researcher works on their own and they think they should create a perfect report and release it to the rest of people and show them the results, I don't think this is really specialization. It should be shareable. As Alex said, it should be distributed in the organization and the insights should circulate in the organization. But as far as the product, it's really difficult to specialize, and I haven't found the solution in product how to make research really work. I mean, how to specialize in a product. I think there's more democracy there. I think we've been discussing for 41 minutes now. So the last question. Start thinking about the questions you want to ask, please. When I was thinking about this panel and about the questions I could ask, what could be interesting for you to discuss, my first idea was ethics, but then I thought that it's not really a conference for researchers only, so that might be a little too overwhelming. But I think I'm going to ask this question indirectly. But from your perspective, from your experience and observations, what are the most brutal crimes committed by researchers who sit at this table where we're all looking for knowledge and we want to use this knowledge to influence the product, service, or even the organization? Krzysztof? I think that a very often problem or a little devil is that you might get a situation when nothing comes out of research. And I had this case that a UX manager who was working on a big product had some people, designers and researchers, and he was an experienced designer himself, but not a researcher. And he said, listen, I hire researchers, they come, they give us the report, we clap our hands, but we don't know what to do next, because the findings are like, the grass is green, and if you look up, you'll see clouds. So I pay them because that's what you need in a team, but I don't really see the value in it. So our findings don't show the direction, they don't result in recommendations for a product team or other stakeholders. So we ask, what do you need it for? And based on this, we formulate some recommendations that set the direction that allows the product team to work. We don't need to hear that the grass is green. On the other hand, you can exaggerate the other way, and I need to admit I sometimes do this, that you have a regular client and you have a consecutive project with them, and it had always been good, so you do it the way you used to do. And it's a big mistake to do things like you used to do them. Because I didn't ask what I should have asked. What are you going to do with this? And my recommendations were wrong because they needed something different this time. They didn't pay attention to this when establishing research goals, and they were okay with the scenario. But actually, my recommendations were a limitation for them. And that was the moment when they didn't really want a direction because they wanted to set this direction together. They wanted a different path for the team. So it's a similar mistake, but the other way around. So sometimes you might not be showing the way clearly, but on the other hand, you might also show the way clearly, but without asking what you really want to do with this. How are you going to use it? So the same devil in two different versions. Ola, you know what? I will refer to Harry Potter. There are forgivable and unforgivable researcher errors. Sometimes we don't have enough time because development or a client is waiting. And this is something you can understand and forgive. But I also agree that sometimes we get inapplicable insights. I saw dozens of reports, like 200, 300 pages, graphics and diagrams. Beautiful, but nothing came out of it. What we learned was that the browser was too big, or there is a browser. But what about it? What we should do about it? And there's the product team waiting to be told what they should do, where to put this feature. So we can also forgive trading of reliability and the possibility of conducting research. Is it better to have research with 2 users or none at all? Sometimes because we have little time, small budget, we have less reliable research just to do it, not to, stay in your own head. And there are also unforgivable mistakes or errors, usually connected with greediness. For example, a corporation works with an agency who deliver research tool, and the agency works on this tool even if they are not the target group, and it should never happen. But anything else, I can forgive that. There are many sins that are motivated by profit, so that's a no-no, but sins motivated by taking care of the product, that's okay. So it's like mistakes versus cheating, I think. I agree with Krzysztof and Alex. I think it's very easy for researchers to conclude that they can conduct research, generate a report with some recommendations that can be technical or not. But eventually they will decide, okay, we're done. And I think that if you don't process the results and you just leave it like that, and you just complain that something has not been introduced, it's a big sin. And I think all researchers had this moment, this situation when they thought they were done, but they were not. So this problem is still existing. And also we limit ourselves to certain methods. We don't add to our skill set something that we could try. For example, by a feature or some technique where we give a user a certain amount of resources and we say, for example, tell us how much you could pay for this feature. So trying to figure things out. experimenting. I think this is something we often forget about. We just generate this report and we use 4 techniques and that's it. Sometimes it can work, but I think it makes things difficult because, okay, you can tell business that's a great report and then not implement it because there are no next steps, no decisions about what to do next, how it transfers to design, no artifacts. These are just recommendations. And the second thing that comes to my mind, something that I've mentioned in my presentation, is bias. And I think these 2 elements are you can see this very often. You have certain assumptions about the product you want to confirm, and that's all you do. You're just looking for confirmations. And I think it's even more dangerous when you work on your own and there's no one to have a look at it and say, hey, you pushed it too far. So going one direction too far. And I also had a third thing in mind, but I forgot. Okay, thank you. These were my questions, but perhaps there are some questions in the room. Okay. I hope it's not a too detailed or too difficult question, but I had a pleasure to work in an American product company in a very research-driven environment. We had a 40-person team and 20 people in research. And the problem was that because of this particular organization culture, which I think was very high, each feature or each epic had to be preceded with research, while we as designers, experienced designers, had some guerrilla research. And then when we had a new research, the machine would stop, the research would enter to do its thing. I know that for some people it might seem like some El Dorado. Sometimes this research would give good and sometimes it would give bad results. But my question is, when is this moment when you go, we don't do this research now, we add things because we already know a lot about the users. So when do we freeze things in terms of research? And what should be where's this moment when the research devalidates? Is it a time criteria or some global changes? So a couple of questions in one. Thank you. Who would like to answer?
Okay.
You reminded me my analogy of splashing in this atomic research swamp. And it was difficult to admit that things were not working, but that's what it's for, to actually have this recycling. And I think that in this particular case was that we would add new researchers, but nobody segregated the data that we already had and draw some conclusions. So we would research things all over again and generate cost. So there was no one to manage the results of research. We had hundreds of research activities and, research the same things all over again. And there are many cases of corporations like this that do the same thing 3 times because they don't even know that they've commissioned research. So I think it's a pretty common mistake. And the fact that we're attached to something that works makes us repeat mistakes. So in this group of 20 researchers, there should be one person, for example, who would manage this previously gained knowledge, and the decisions could be made faster. So I guess it was the mistake in management or team management. And it's not the case that you had too many researchers. It's about the division of roles and the scope of responsibilities. So maybe there were not enough decisions on the managerial level. So I would experiment with managing knowledge and check if we still burn budget or we need new decisions, new tests, and see how things work. So I would generally appoint a person to manage the previously obtained data and make sure that the design doesn't stop. I thought about my last project where I was asked to about a mini research and what we should do, and I asked about threats, what we are not able to do technically, and I spent 3 hours on full story observing user behavior on the website, and I saw that the only thing we should do are the things we can't do. So I got my answer. This is doomed project. This is something we're not able to implement because this is the case where technically we just can't cope with this. So I think I was able to say that having analyzed the behavior, we've already fulfilled this threat. And asking about money, technology, and risks can limit the things you want to implement. And full story is a function like Hotjar that you watch the behavior of people using the website. So you can observe a user of a given segment or a group of segments, how they use the website. So again, asking about threats, about what you can do, how much you can do, and checking real options. Literally a call with the team, with a product team, to check if there are no other options. And I think you can just give up certain solutions. I think you touched upon a very important process problem. No matter what great specialists you have, if you don't have research ops or design ops, you can't talk about efficient use of research results because you can have data repositories, so use the data from previous research activities, but you also need processes that you run every time you need new data. And additionally, there should be a process that makes it possible to not stop the development. I'm not a real fan. I prefer where you have a Scrum process and dual track on the design side, discovery and delivery. And discovery reoccurs when you need to discover something, obviously, and it feeds data to delivery, that creates screens, and then it all goes to Scrum. But I don't like the situation when you stop development to do some research, because this is when research gets this bad reputation of time-consuming and expensive thing, and causes the situation that you can't be another hit in the Silicon Valley because research stopped you. I'm sure that it was a great experience for you to work in a team like that with so many researchers and designers. I also work in a team like this, and I see this critical need to create processes that facilitate using research results and allow us to maintain quality of what we do. I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. Let me add that I think it was Erika Hall who said this, that it's good that if there's something going on in delivery and there is one researcher, but in the previous phase, there should be another person who then passes the results to delivery. So it's like the ops solution and a loop. But we've touched upon this topic on Product Camp in Berlin. I recommend it if you would like to find it. But any other questions? I see one hand up. I didn't know I would get to answer the question. So I imagine that the companies that do have research department are dream companies. I work in a company where where we have research, but it's all based on analytics, and they claim they have quantity data, and they ask us to draw whatever we need out of that. So sometimes we have 2, 3 solutions, and you know what passes? The argument that somebody likes something better or less. So whichever gets more votes passes. We don't really know what the user would prefer. So what do you do to convince managers to hire at least 1 or 2 researchers? Let me answer this one because I answer this question quite often. So first of all, you need to show the value of what you do. So if you rely on quantity data and you want to use qualitative data, do some small research and show its value. That's what's important for me. And I had this corridor test recently, and it took me a lot of time to explain, everything about navigation and so on. So that's what I do. And, everybody loved this, that, wow, Carolina did research, but it's not my job because I'm not a researcher. So I don't want to do this every day. It was great, but how do you convince the company to hire researchers? Well, what you did in quality research could be dealt with in a different way. If yes, then maybe the management thought that, okay, it was great, but maybe we don't need it so much. So basically, showing metrics, you should investigate the starting point, show what you've done, and then present the state afterwards. You need to present the insights, tell them how you implemented the insights, and show them that, for example, users spend more time in application. Talk with business using numbers. Talk to them about the risk mitigation. Don't just tell them, I conducted research. It's great that you've done that because that's wonderful. But some people don't understand this. They understand concrete numbers that changed something.
Well, I could just sign under that, what you've just said. You need the success of the process that you're trying to introduce. One simple activity that you can show, a task you have completed, usually something that cannot fail. As you know, cannot fail is a very good argument. It's a little bit devil, as I mentioned before. As UX, we like to say that UX really pays off. But when you show the metrics, we are a little bit afraid. Because maybe it turns out it doesn't, maybe I'm wrong. And when in fact we do the research and show that there is return on investment, the simplest indicator ever, then you've got data. If the ROI generates a budget that helps you hire and allows you to hire an employee, then you can employ a researcher, an employee, because the budget shows I can do that. So if you have done this job, done the research, but in my opinion, what it lacked was showing that if you introduce this research as regular practice, you will get return on investment into a researcher that would allow to finance somebody's salary and, of course, to have something surplus. If you can show that, and it's a very difficult thing to do, especially that it's your first time, then there's a chance, a higher chance, that it will just pass on. Because they are difficult things. If you want to come up to me in the after party and we can discuss that. But I think that's what I was missing. If I were to hire an employee and I have no idea what they're doing, I would like to know how much profit can he or she generate if they want to earn this money. Or the cost of this employee is such and such, and they need to bring in enough money to cover their salary. It's a strong argument to hire somebody. Bring me 20,000, so I'll pay you 10. And smile. They are nice matrices and you just need to use them. Let me continue on that. Even though we are 5 or 7 minutes behind, if you would like to keep talking about research and wonder about what to do with that, maybe go deeper into the subject, we are going to be there in the after party. So feel invited to approach us. Thank you for the panel. I hope you found it interesting.